Well, growing up in Chinatown has given me a host of unforgettable memories. The original folks have gone, except for a few elderly ones living out their days. The modern Chinatown as it is actually a tourist destination, occupied with shops that sell cheap merchandise, souvenirs, eateries, and then upstairs are all offices. Culturally, Chinatown is dead. The tradition of sight, smell, and sound has vanished. So in this case, I felt the urgent need to produce this book, to preserve and to tell the story of old Chinatown. In fact, this book, the cover design is taken out one of my paintings, which I did in 1962. It is called The Lost Soul. It's a very abstract painting with projected figures coming out of the painting and going in, It's a three-dimensional thing. Well, this is a recount of my growing up experience. Chinatown Unspoken is the book that I want to reiterate the darkest moment in the history of Chinatown. The people suffered from the outbreak of the war, the abuse by the Japanese soldiers, the Sukching massacre, and even after the return of the British, it was left undone, uncontrolled, unmanaged. And finally, at the independence of Singapore, the redevelopment of Chinatown, which I feel a bit hasty. In the book, I would express in detail, for instance, the Blue Triangle, which is a most expensive red light district for sex. And in it, I also try to tell you the life of a hostess. And also the other thing is the gangsters, their code of law, and their battles. Chinatown always remained as my hometown, its people and its spirit. The tough environment of Chinatown has shaped me into somebody who is courageous in my work and who is humble and generous. At 80, writing this book is a surprise to all my friends. In fact, it's a greater surprise to myself. I will finally write a book, Well, I hope you all enjoy reading it.
Honestly, my interest level in publishing this book was low when Eddie was first introduced to me. In my mind, I was thinking this must be another run-of-the-mill book written by someone who happened to live in Chinatown for a short period of time and decided to write a manuscript based on hearsay and maybe some research.
I've known Eddie for more than 10 years, and over the years, whenever we meet, he liked to share with me stories of what happened in Chinatown and how it actually molded him to who he is today. So when he shared with me that he's toiling with the idea of writing a book, I was really excited. I felt that it would be an interesting take on how Chinatown really impacted on the people that lived there back in the day.
From our first encounter in his house, I was enthralled by the first-hand accounts of this man who lived through the war years in Chinatown and whose interest in Chinatown never died till this very day. I knew I was holding a gem in my hands because there must be very few people of Eddie's age today with a lucid mind who is both able and willing to recount a vivid history of Chinatown in written form. While we can no longer replicate the sights, the scents, the sounds of that foregone era, the best we can offer now is our imagination fired by the power of words. While Eddie may not be a researcher or an academic scholar, I found what he has written to be compelling and authoritative. as history is often best told by those who have lived through it.
The Chinatown that I knew growing up was really an overcrowded tourist location, and it's also a place that my parents and my grandparents would visit during festive seasons like Chinese New Year. So when I saw the book, I was curious and I wanted to learn more about these forgotten stories of old Chinatown. Reading the book, it felt like I was stepping into a different era, and learning more about the hardships of the people back then really gave me a new perspective of what it was like to grow up in old Chinatown. I do have a greater admiration for the people and the older generation back then because the times that they grew up in was really difficult.
One of the key takeaways, in my opinion, is his bold and fearless Chinatown spirit. Singapore, as we know, is a melting pot of cultures, but we also know the importance of retaining our own heritage as Chinese. So in the book, Eddie actually shared some of the struggles he faced starting out, the relationship he had with his family, specifically his father and his mother, and the various expectations that Chinese parents have. I can really relate to them, and it made me realize whether you're living in Chinatown back in the day or anywhere else in Singapore, as Chinese, most of us actually still retain the same kind of spirit as our forefathers, and I'm actually quite proud of that.
The points that stood out to me were the wartime stories and I think the childhood recounts of the author. I never knew that places like Death Street and Death Houses existed back then. Also, learning more about how brothels was run in the Blue Triangle and also how the samsui ladies rebuilt Singapore, all of which really gave me a realistic view of what it was like to grow up in old Chinatown. And I think it really shed light on this uglier side of history that you wouldn't normally learn about in the classroom. I would recommend this book to the younger audiences, like maybe the secondary school kids, because in social studies lessons, you really learn about these darker and uglier sides of the Chinatown history, like the massacre and the Blue Triangle. These things I wouldn't have learned about if I didn't read the book. So I think it's a big eye-opener, and it would really connect them with the heritage and the culture that the older generation grew up in.
Firstly, after the redevelopment of Chinatown, many of the pictures of the older buildings, the sights and scenes in Chinatown, they are really hard to come by, because back then you don't have digital cameras, and even if they took pictures, some of them are nowhere to be found. So in this book, what I feel was really special is he included a lot of personal sketches of what he remembered Chinatown to be back in the day. So I think it's interesting for the younger generation to see, even if they don't have a real picture, they can see based on the sketches, what was Chinatown like when our forefathers were actually living there. To me, that's a very nice touch.
I hope that readers, especially our younger ones, can better appreciate a slice of Singapore's colourful history through the real-life stories contained within the pages of Chinatown Unspoken. As the saying goes, those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat it.